Welcome to my house. Welcome to the Structure Talk podcast, a production of Structure Tech Home Inspections. My name is Reuben Saltzman. I'm your host, alongside building science geek Tessa Murry. We help home inspectors up their game through education, and we help homeowners to be better stewards of their houses. We've been keeping it real on this podcast since 2019, and we are also the #1 home inspection podcast in the world, according to my mom. Welcome back to another episode of the Structure Talk podcast. Tessa, it's just you and me today. One-on-one. How you doing, Tess?
Hey, Reuben. It's good to see you. We've been having a lot of guests on recently. I know we talked about this recently, but it's good just to see your face. And I am excited to kind of dive into your brain today because I know when we don't have a guest on, it's usually going to be a topic that you've been thinking about a lot recently.
Yes. I still got the blog going every week. There's always a new topic and I always do videos. I try to always do videos on those. And a lot of the time it's fun to do them in podcast format because with the blog, I try to be concise, think through exactly what we wanted to say. But with the podcast, it's fun to expound on a lot of this stuff and do the long format where we just kind of riff on some of this stuff. So I thought this would be a fun one to do. Yeah. And so today.
So what's the topic for today?
Today, we're going to talk about home inspector terms. We're going to talk about the stuff that home inspectors talk about, these phrases we use and terms we refer to day in and day out. And for us, they just become everyday terms. But I think for a lot of people buying houses, people who don't know a ton about the home industry, a lot of people get lost with a lot of these terms we use. So I thought it'd be fun to kind of decode a lot of this, get into the inspectorese talk and explain what all this stuff means.
I think, how have we not done a podcast on this in the last, 4 years that we've had a podcast? I think it's because sometimes we're inside the fishbowl and we don't take a step out of it to realize, we inspectors, we have a whole different language we use. A lot of it is construction terms or just, lingo from the field that we take for granted that we understand what these words mean. But when we're talking to a typical home buyer, homeowner, seller, whatever, a lot of times we don't even realize that we need to take a step back and explain some of these terms we use day in, day out. It's a different language. So I'm excited to dive into this list that you've put together and see if there's some other terms too that we should add to it as well. But let's get started.
Okay. All right. The first one that I thought of, and this was like items 1, 2, and 3, it should make up the first 3, I think, is deferred maintenance.
Deferred maintenance. Okay. Explain to me what you mean by that, Mr. Inspector.
Well, what I'm going to say on this podcast and what I might say during a home inspection are probably going to be two different things. I'd say deferred maintenance is a euphemism. It's a very nice, PC, bedside manner friendly way of putting something when what we're really trying to say is
it's crap.
It's crap. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it, Tess. Yeah, people have not been doing the work that they should have been doing. We've got some. It's neglect. That's another way of putting it. There's maintenance that should have been done, and it has been deferred. It's a nice way to put it. It's been put off, or maybe to put it yet another way, it just hasn't been done. How's that?
Yeah. It hasn't been done. And there could be a lot of reasons as to why. And we're not trying to put blame on the homeowner or say, shame on them, because there are all sorts of situations where people may not be able to take care of their home that we understand. But as a home inspector, we come in and you can take a wide variety of these projects that should have been done and lump them into this category of deferred maintenance. And I think it's important for people to understand too, this could be something as simple as like maybe a little bit of chipping, peeling paint to potential like areas of rot that are allowing water in, and water's been getting into the wall for years and years and years, and there's a lot of issues going on, like structurally and with mold and whatnot. So it could be, when we say deferred maintenance, hopefully your inspector is explaining exactly what's going on and what the potential liabilities or issues could be as well.
Yeah. And Tess, that makes me think of one. We chatted a little before the show about some other ones that you may have come up with. And I think that's a good segue for one on your list. You had mentioned water intrusion.
Yeah.
Now, to me, this is just basic. Everybody knows what water intrusion is, but maybe you don't. What is water intrusion, Tess?
I was talking to my family about this, and they're like, yeah, just the terms that you use with water intrusion. And I was like, I thought the same thing as you, Reuben. Like, that's very self-explanatory, right? Water and intrusion. But they're like, no, us common folks say you've got a leak. What do you mean by water intrusion? And so I think it's one of those terms where you have to kind of, it could apply to a lot of different scenarios, some being minor issues, minor little leaks, and some being potentially bigger issues, more problematic, more costly things. And water intrusion is basically anytime you've got outside water leaking into your house. It could be through the walls, it could be through the roof, it could be through the ceiling, and it could be from things like rain or snow to even potentially like we deal with in Minnesota, frost inside the attic when it gets really insanely cold and water dripping in that way. That could be water intrusion, or even water from an ice dam coming in.
Yep.
So there's lots of potential ways for water to get into your house, and a leak doesn't always necessarily, I think, describe these different ways. Yeah.
And the way I differentiate it, I mean, my line in the sand is if the water originated from inside the house, it's not water intrusion. The water was already there. That's a leak.
Yeah.
That's a problem for sure. But water intrusion means the water's coming from outside.
Yeah. Thank you for emphasizing that point. That's very important. Yeah. Because I think home inspectors a lot of times use the term leak for, like you said, Reuben, when there's like maybe a water pipe inside the house that's leaking or dripping, or there's a plumbing leak somewhere else. That's when I think a lot of times we say there's a leak.
Yep. Okay. So another one, let's talk about some positive. Here's one we talk about frequently is a clean house. Whenever a home inspector talks about a clean house, we're not talking about meticulously scrubbed down and vacuumed and mopped and all that other jazz. We're talking about a house that has been well maintained. It's in good condition, right?
You don't use that term literally sometimes?
Every once in a while, maybe, but no, for the most part, I don't. No, I'm not talking about.
Why don't you comment on a house being clean sometimes?
I'm not there to look at that. That's a transient thing. I mean, you hire house cleaners and now the house is clean. I'm not here to report on dirt. We're here to talk about the condition of the house, more the permanent condition. So a clean house doesn't mean that it has been thoroughly scrubbed. It means the house is in good shape. It's a good thing to hear your home inspectors talk about a clean house. And
just to expound on that for a second, one thing you taught me when I was learning, to inspect was that we don't comment on aesthetics. We try not to.
Yeah.
That's a very personal thing, and we're here to look at the technical system, the systems of the house and the condition that they're in, and safety issues and structural issues and maintenance and all of that. And so it's not our job to say, oh, this paint color is really atrocious, or this carpet is really old. And that, of course, can get you in trouble, as you can imagine, as a home inspector.
Oh,
so we try
yeah.
to stay away from those comments and those personal opinions about people's houses and their choices. And I think whether or not something is clean or filthy, dirty is kind of lumped into that category, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
We don't,
absolutely.
If someone is, people have different ways of living, and we try not to talk about those.
Yeah. And almost to a fault, not a fault, but we do a very good job of it. And a lot of people know that about us. I remember specifically there was an agent. She and her clients were buying this house. They had us inspect it, and the walls, the whole inside was like bright pink. I mean, it just screamed at you. And Tessa, It was hideous. and they hated it. They knew they're going to paint this house right away. Can't imagine how many people didn't buy the house because of the colors, but I mean, they knew they hated it. But they knew that when my dad came out to do the inspection, he would not comment on it. And so they set up a camera and they recorded him coming in the door just to see what a good poker face he was going to have. It was hilarious. Yeah, I mean, he walked in, you saw him look around, he raised his eyebrows a little, and then he went right into it, and they all just burst out laughing because he had such a poker face.
I can totally imagine Neil just going, "Oh,
yeah,
hey.
Okay, all right.
It's
Hi, I'm Neil."
Like, yeah.
Yep. So, all right, that's clean. Another one.
Yep.
I don't know if this is a common home inspector term. Maybe it's just something that I used to say, but whenever I was inspecting a really clean house, I'd apologize to my clients for this being a very boring inspection. And I feel like that's definitely a good thing to hear a home inspector talk about.
Well, and then you have to explain, hopefully, to the people that boring is good, right?
Yes, definitely. Yeah. We always do. We say, and I don't mean that in a bad sense. It's a nice house, but I don't have a ton of stuff to talk about. I'll show you how everything works. I'll give you a great education today, but I'm not going to have a gigantic report for you with a bunch of suggestions because I don't have a lot. This house is very clean.
Yes. Yeah, boring is code for clean. Yeah, anytime your home inspector says, well, it's been a long day, or there's a lot to look at here, or this has been a very interesting inspection. Between the lines. Yeah, that means you got a lot going on there. It may not be a good thing. Yep.
All right. Next one on the list, grading. I feel like everybody knows what this is, but maybe not.
Does the house get an A, B, C, D, or F?
No. That's not what we're talking about, Tess. We're talking about the slope of the ground around the outside of the house. You want the ground to slope away so water drains away. And when it does slope away, that's positive grading. When it doesn't slope away, when the water drains toward your house, we call that negative grading. It's graded towards the house. And it's easy to remember. Negative is a bad thing. You don't want to have negative grading. You want to have positive grading. You want the ground to slope away. I think just about every home inspector is going to talk about this at some point when we're walking around the outside of the house. Agreed?
Agreed. Yeah, that is one of those kind of technical terms, I guess, when you take a step back. Not every homeowner talks about their negative grading around their house. So, but it's something we talk about every day and is one of the most important things when it comes to keeping a house dry and structurally sound and avoiding any moisture problems.
Yep. Yeah. Agreed. Another one. Yeah, thanks. Another one would be end of life expectancy. And this is such a big one. I was actually writing this blog post with all these terms, and I decided end of life expectancy needs its very own blog post. I mean, we need to do a better job of defining life expectancy because so often we'll say, the water heater is 9 years old. Average life for a water heater is 10 years. It's at the end of its life expectancy. And then right away, you get people who turn to their spouse or whatever and say, the home inspector said the water heater needs to be replaced. No, that's not what we're saying. Just because it's at the end of its life expectancy doesn't mean that it's going to go out tomorrow. We have no idea how long these appliances are going to last. And I think about applying this term to humans. I mean, you go to the Google machine and you look up the average age of a male in the United States. It's 77 years. That means maybe if I'm within 10% of that, if I'm say 70, you might say I'm at the end of my life expectancy. But you don't know anything about me. You don't know what I
say goodbye.
Yeah, exactly. You don't know what my diet is, how much I exercise, what type of things I do to live longer. You know nothing about my history. Huh?
Is there a lot of deferred maintenance?
Exactly. You know nothing about it. And the same thing goes for appliances. I almost wish we didn't report on this as home inspectors because we don't have any way of knowing how long something's going to last. All we can do is go on averages.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I'm glad you're bringing this topic up because we are, so we follow the AFCI standards of practice, correct?
Yep.
And do they require that if a big system is at the end of its expected life, we report on that?
Yep. Yep. That needs to go in the inspection report. Need to
Right. So
report on
that's
stuff
one of
at
the
the end of
reasons
its
why we
life.
do that. And we also think, I mean, just from a practical standpoint, if you're buying a house, it's nice to know if your heating system or cooling system or, something big like a roof is going to need to be replaced relatively soon. And like you said, Ruben, we can't always say exactly when it's going to fail. That would be impossible. We would be wizards if we could do that.
Yes.
And there's always going to be things that live way longer than we thought they would or things that may die sooner than we expected. So we don't really know, but we do our best to kind of put things, um, you know, I guess put things into context and give people a warning so that they can at least potentially budget or have a proper expectation of these systems. And so we do that. But like you said, it can be highly variable, and it's important as a home inspector to explain what we mean when we say that, because it doesn't mean, like you said, that you've got to go replace this tomorrow. It means that it could need to be replaced soon, but it may not be.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know. I personally think it's pretty bad form for a home buyer to go back to a home seller and say, hey, the water heater's 10 years old. We want you to replace it. Like asking for new stuff just because it's old, it seems like
Yeah.
really bad form to me. But I'm not a realtor. I don't
Yeah.
I don't like to say it. I hesitate to even say it on this
Yeah.
podcast because I feel like I'm going outside of my lane. But if I'm selling a house and someone came back to me and they're like, "Hey, I want a new furnace because yours is 17
Yours
years
is
old,"
old.
I mean, it's
It's like,
working fine.
yeah.
What?
Well, and you're buying a used house, so not everything's going to be brand new. So where do you draw the line of what you want the seller to replace and what you don't want them to replace, right? Just because
Yep.
something's old, maybe the carpet is stained, and you're not asking them to rip out all the carpet. But I will say, I was looking at some properties with my parents recently, and it was a beautiful townhome, and it was like, 30 years old, and it had been maintained really well, and the roof was new, siding was new, everything was beautiful, but every single appliance was original. I mean, I mean, even like furnace, AC, it had an air exchanger, refrigerator, stove, microwave, washer, dryer, all of them were 30 some years old. And I just said, you know you have to think about that, and you have to really budget for that, because who knows, you could move into that house and you have to replace every single appliance,
Yeah.
and that could be really costly. So there might be situations where, again, you want to work with a good real estate agent who can help you understand the market, and you know and what's going on, to see if it's something you do try and adjust the price or negotiate over, because maybe it is, if it's something that's going to be 30, 40, 50 grand to deal with.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly. All right.
Yeah.
So
Well, that's a
that's
good
end of
one.
life
Yeah.
expectancy.
Okay.
Another one we
What's
got on
next?
here is safety upgrade. What do you think of when you hear safety upgrade?
Safety upgrade. Um, I have no idea. What does that mean when you're talking about a house? A safety upgrade for a house? In what
I'm thinking
context?
about stuff where the house was built, it was built to code, it's all fine, but over the years we've discovered there's additional things you can add to the house to make it safer. Things like adding smoke alarms or carbon monoxide alarms or GFCI devices or arc fault circuit interrupters or tightening the spacing on stairway balusters, putting a metal
Mm.
screen in front of your gas fireplace, all these different things. I would call these safety upgrades. The house was built properly. It's not a defect based on when the house was constructed, but we've found better ways of doing things. We found ways to make the house safer. And all of these recommendations, these are not pointing out bad things. We're not pointing out defects. We're saying, here's an upgrade you could do to make your house safer. I think it's important to make that distinction.
Yeah, it's an upgrade. And you just rattled off a bunch of things that I think could also be on this list that we could talk about, because it is home inspector lingo. But like GFCIs and arc fault breakers are these, newer, I'm doing in quotes, air quotes, safety devices for your electrical system that, in theory, prevent fires or prevent you from being electrocuted. And older houses may not have them, especially where they should. And so those are things as a home inspector we're looking for, and we would make a recommendation. It's not a defect, but a recommendation for these safety upgrades,
Sure.
like you talked about.
Yep.
Another thing, and I want to circle back to these GFCI, what that even means, and arc faults, so you can explain it, Reuben. But I also want to touch on, did you say smoke alarm or smoke detectors?
I said smoke alarm. I'm careful to get it right. Yes.
So can you explain the difference between a smoke alarm and smoke detector, and a CO alarm versus a carbon dioxide alarm or detector? Because we hear that a lot too.
All right. I'll try to remember everything you just asked. First off, the smoke alarm. I'm probably not going to get the technical definition correct. I'm going by memory, but a smoke alarm is going to be a device that has both a smoke detector. It's a sensor that will detect the presence of smoke, and it's going to have some notification thing built into it, like a siren, to let you know that it has smoke, and it's all self-contained into one unit. That's a smoke alarm. When you have only a smoke detector, it might be part of a bigger system, like a security system. Typically, you might find it if you have a whole home security system, or you're in a commercial setting where you have remote detectors, these devices that detect smoke, and then you'll have a separate alarm or siren or something like that. That would be a smoke detector. But for residential, like 99.9% of what we see, they're going to be smoke alarms where it's all self-contained. So smoke detector is kind of an outdated term.
Okay.
Yep.
That's good to know. And what about the carbon monoxide alarms / detectors? What's the proper term for that? And what do they do?
Same thing. CO alarm or carbon monoxide alarm. And you joked about carbon dioxide. So often we'll hear people say, oh, you need to have CO2 alarms. What they really mean is CO. They're never referring to carbon dioxide. They're just using the wrong term. That's all.
Carbon monoxide, right?
Carbon
One
monoxide.
oxygen, not two. Yes.
Exactly.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, that's good. And circling back to this, you're talking about GFCIs as being an upgrade for a house, for a safety upgrade, and arc faults being a safety upgrade. Explain to me what those two things mean.
Man, we should do a show just based on GFCIs and AFCIs. We should get an electrical expert to bore the heck out of everybody and explain exactly how they work. And, I say that tongue in cheek. I'd be interested in it. I'd like to hear technically how they work. But here's my remedial understanding of it. Yeah, high level
version.
GFI stands for ground fault interrupter, but that's really an old school term. The more modern way of referring to it, probably for the last 20 years, would be GFCI, ground fault circuit interrupter. It's the same thing, as far as I know, and it's this device that is constantly measuring the voltage going out and coming back in. It's always going in and coming out, or going out and coming back in, like 60 times a second or something like that, 60 hertz, which gets us 120 volts. You multiply it by 2 because it goes up and down. It's a device that measures the voltage. And if there's any imbalance, if some of that voltage is taking a different path to get back to its source, meaning it's leaking out, you got a problem. It means that somebody might be getting shocked. It's like if I touched a wire, some of that current might go through my body to complete the circuit. It means I'm getting shocked. We've got a fault. It's using the ground to get back to its origination. So that we call it a ground fault. And to make it really simple, it's this device that helps prevent electrocutions. That's the job of a GFI or a GFCI. And they come in the form of either circuit breakers. You can have a circuit breaker with built-in GFCI protection, or you could have a standalone device. Most often, we'll find those in primary. I had to pause there. I'll say the right term, Tessa. primary bathrooms.
Good for you.
I'm remembering our
still struggle
podcast with
with that.
Rhonda Wilson.
Yep.
We got to be PC here. We'll find.
By the way, for our listeners, we are trying to not use the terms master bathroom or master bedroom. Correct.
Yeah, we're following along with the real estate community. That's what they're doing.
Yes.
So we'll try
We
to
don't
follow
want to
along.
offend anyone. Yeah.
Yep. So it's this. It looks a lot like a traditional outlet, except there's nothing to plug into. It's just got two buttons on there. It's test and reset. And sometimes we'll find those devices protecting the circuit for a Whirlpool tub. You might have it tucked away in the primary bedroom closet or mounted on the wall somewhere in the bathroom. It could be a standalone device. It's not too common to find those, but they do exist. And then the one that everybody's familiar with is just the GFI outlet or GFCI outlet. And that's an outlet that has a test button and a reset button right in the middle of it. And you'll find those in all kinds of areas where you have a greater likelihood of getting electrocuted if you get a shock. And the difference there, if you get a shock, it means you had electricity go through you. If you get electrocuted, it means you die. There's the difference between the two. So if you're going to have your GFI protect you, you're still going to get shocked, but it'll cut off the circuit before you get electrocuted. Did I forget anything, Tess? I know you know all this.
That was very thorough. You did a great job explaining that, Reuben. And just for any person that's listening that may not understand what you're talking about with circuits and stuff, just to clarify, in your house, the electricity comes from a source, either underground or overhead into your house. It goes through the electrical panel, and then it takes all these different pathways and wires, these circuits through your house to, turn on lights and power outlets and all these things. And then that electricity needs to find its way back to the panel, back to the main electrical panel too, to complete the circuit. So these devices you're talking about are located, either it's a circuit breaker inside the electrical panel that can sense leakage in the circuit, or it's a device on the circuit somewhere like a GFCI outlet that can trip and cut off the power to that outlet so that you're not electrocuted.
Exactly.
Right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And those devices have not been around forever, but the earliest ones were installed, I think, in pools, right? In the 70s, maybe?
That's right.
GFCI.
That's exactly right. Early 70s. Yep.
Yeah. So if we're inspecting houses that are older than that haven't had any electrical upgrades or safety updates at all, then we'll be definitely recommending that homeowners install GFCI outlets where they should, and potentially even breakers in the main panel.
Yeah. And we don't get that specific. We just say add GFCI protection. You can figure out how you want to do it. And just to hit it real quick, some of the most common areas that we recommend upgrading to GFCI protection, it's going to be outdoors, unfinished basements, kitchens, bathrooms, garages. What am I missing, Tess? That's most of them, isn't it?
Unfinished spaces. Yeah, I guess places that could be near water, right? Where there's exposure to water.
Yeah, or really good contact with the earth. Yeah, either one.
Yeah.
Yep, like a garage, that's generally a dry place, but that concrete slab, I mean, that is a great conductor. And if you're out there barefoot, you have a very good path to the earth. You get a shock when you're standing on a concrete slab barefoot, good chance you could get electrocuted. That's a nasty shock. And you know what? There's a recent change in the electric code. The current requirement now is that actually all basements, not just unfinished basements, but all basement outlets need GFI protection now.
Wow, I forgot about that.
Yeah, we haven't really caught up with that.
Man,
we don't recommend adding it on finished basements in our home inspection reports yet. Maybe someday we will. I don't know.
Yeah.
And then
pretty soon it's going to be like all outlets are GFCI outlets, right?
and AFCI, I bet. Yeah.
And arc fault. Yeah.
So let's touch on arc fault briefly. Here's my basic understanding of it. It's a device that helps prevent fires. There.
Yes.
Are we good?
I like that definition. Yeah.
they
For the sake of time, because I realize this podcast is already almost 30 minutes, right? Yeah, for the
I
sake
said
of
this is
time.
probably going to be a quick podcast, 20 minutes, and we're going to be done. Here we're not even
here
halfway
we
through
are.
the list. But
Oh, man. Yeah.
AFCIs, it's a lot the same. They come in the form of breakers, standalone devices, AFCI outlets or receptacles, however you want to say it. And their job is to prevent fires. They sense when the current has these funky spikes because you got some type of shorting maybe, and then they kill the circuit. So those are required all over the house. We're not at the point in our home inspections where we recommend adding AFCI protection. I know some home inspectors do, but we don't. So there's that. All right. I don't even know what got us down this tangent, Tess. How'd we get here?
We're talking about safety upgrades. And then you were rattling off all these terms that could be potential safety upgrades. And I'm like, even those terms are things that might need translation for a typical homeowner. Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So back to our list.
Moving on.
What does it mean when a home inspector talks about black stains or suspected organic microbial growth? What are we talking about, Tess?
This is the big one. You didn't save this for last. You wanted to dive right into this right now, huh?
Maybe I should have. Yeah.
Okay, well, we still have gas in the tank to talk about it. I feel like this is one of the most challenging things to talk about because I feel like it's a very sensitive topic and it can really upset a lot of people and it can impact even a transaction, right? Have you seen deals fall apart because of this?
I have personally used, and what we're referring to, we'll let the cat out of the bag here. We're referring to mold when we say this, or we think it's mold. I have personally put in my reports like, hey, there's some staining under the kitchen sink that looks like mold. I've always been very careful not to say it is mold if I'm not actually testing, but there's stains under the kitchen sink that look like mold. Have it cleaned up, blah blah. I had one client, I remember, they couldn't get a mortgage. Their mortgage company denied them their mortgage. They had to find somebody else because I used the word mold in my inspection report. They're like, nope, the house has mold. We're not giving you a loan. Wow. So ever since then, I've been a little bit more careful. Yeah.
Well, yeah.
So frustrating.
And then the tricky part is too, if you are not using the word mold and maybe you're using something less incriminating or scary like dark staining, then you've had that backfire too, right, Reuben?
Oh,
you had that backfire.
And then you get a contractor who comes out and says, I mean, they just take one look at it. They're not a mold specialist. They're not an indoor air quality specialist. They're none of that. They're just a general contractor, but they now have more trust because they're somebody who works on houses. And they go in an attic and they say, oh, that's mold. You got mold here. Your home inspector should have told you that's mold. And you look at the report, we said there's black stains, and they're like, oh, yeah, you didn't tell me it was mold. The contractor said it was obvious. And it's like, your contractor has no idea about how carefully we choose our words. and they're not testing.
Yeah. It's like you lose. It's a lose-lose sometimes, the situation we're put in. But I think one thing I've found, depending on, black stains, or what did you say, suspected organic microbial growth, mold, whatever word you use as a home inspector, it's really important to understand what a sensitive topic and word it is for people and what a trigger it can be. And to help them understand what you actually mean. If you're going to use the term dark staining, help them understand that it's probably mold. If you're going to use the term mold, help them understand that you're not licensed to even say that it's mold. Maybe if you're in a state that requires like licensing for mold testing or whatever to diagnose it, that it's actually mold, let them know that, from your experience, this looks like mold, but you can't definitively say it's mold. So we're going to call it mold-like staining. But it's really important just to make sure, as you said, Reuben, people understand what you're talking about when you use any of these terms.
Agreed. All right. So there's black stains. We'll go through a few easy ones. HVAC, or people say HVAC. We're talking, it's an
Mm-hmm.
acronym: heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. It's the professional that deals with making your house warm or cold and moving air around in your house, making sure that it's properly ventilated. Are we good on that?
Yep.
We don't need to go into any more detail,
I
right?
don't think we need to. Would that include something like an air exchanger?
Yeah, for sure. That would be the V in HVAC. It's
Okay.
the ventilation.
And I think that might even be a term that some people may not know what it is. And depending on the part of the country you're in, it may not be so common to have an air exchanger. So if you're a home inspector and you're just using that term lightly, you might need to expound on that
For
potentially.
sure. And there's a bunch of terms for air exchanger. We use that. We call things an air exchanger because we found it's the most understood term. But there's a bunch of other more technical terms like a heat recovery ventilator or an energy recovery ventilator. The
Yep.
super old school term, it was a brand name. Everybody called it a Van E system.
Yeah.
They kind of dominated the market. You know, does the house have a Van E? And we're referring to an air exchanger. And it's this box that usually sits down in the basement in the furnace room. It's going to be tied into the ductwork. We got them all over Minnesota. You get people in other climates and they don't see them a lot, but it's going to bring fresh air in. It passes it through a heat exchanger, passes it through some filters, and then it takes stale air and it brings it back out. It's constantly bringing air in, bringing air out. That's it in a nutshell, right?
Yeah. I think so. Yeah. We could do a whole show just on acronyms, couldn't we, Reuben?
Oh, that'd be fun.
HRVs, ERVs, HVAC, arc fault, GFCI.
So many of them. Yeah.
So many.
RTFM.
Oh.
I didn't make that one up, but I
What did
heard
you
that.
say?
So, RTFM. Read the friendly manual. Okay. All right.
How have I not heard of that until now?
Maybe it's not that common. Okay.
Did you just
and
make
maybe
that up?
well, I put in a friendly word for F.
This is a
it's for when
G-rated
things
podcast
are improperly
now.
installed.
So,
This is a G-rated podcast, yes.
yes,
okay. Crawl
keep
space.
it kid friendly.
Kid friendly.
Crawl spaces.
Crawl space.
You mean that spot above my ceiling under my roof?
Because you have to crawl to get there? No, I don't. Thanks for asking, Tess. Because that's what people say all the time. Like, oh, have you gone up in the crawl space? And immediately I got to think for a second. I'm like, wait, this house doesn't have a crawl space. And then I'm like, oh, they're talking about the attic.
They mean the attic. Yeah.
They mean the attic.
Or that little crawl space behind that short wall. Like the knee wall in the side attic.
Yeah, that's not a crawl space. That is still an attic. And you know what's interesting? Crawl space used to be defined in the Minnesota State Building Code. I've got my super ratty 2003 version of the building code, which is falling apart. I'm holding it up to the camera. I know it's well loved. I know this is great pod showing you my building code book, but it's 20 years old, over 20 years old. And we had a special section where Minnesota amended the code and we added a definition to chapter 2 of our version of the IRC, and we defined crawl space, and we called it areas or rooms with less than 7 feet ceiling height measured to the finished floor or grade below. So we're talking about the basement, the lowest area of the house, and we're talking about areas that have 7 feet or less. But then I remember we changed our building code. I don't remember exactly when it was. I think it was like 2007 or something. Maybe it was 2015. And we changed it to say that you could actually have finished spaces in the basement and you could lower your headroom down to 6'8" and still make it a legal dwelling space. So I think we had to throw out our old definition of a crawl space at that point. So now we don't define it anymore. But crawl space, it's going to be the lowest part of the house. And think of the space between the ground and whatever's above your head. And it becomes a crawl space when it's too low to be habitable space. Does that sound like a fair definition?
Yeah, and too low is hard to define. It's
Hard to
probably under
define.
what, 6'8"
I
for
would say less than 6'8"
Minnesota?
for
Yeah.
Minnesota. Yep.
Which is funny because when I think of I mean, there's a lot of older houses that have basements where you kind of have to duck a little bit, but I wouldn't consider it a crawl space unless it's like, at least for me, something that I like physically have to kind of crouch down to get into.
I've got the same mindset, Tess. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. But all right, so that's
And we
that
don't,
crawl
thank goodness,
space.
thank goodness we don't have a lot of crawl spaces here in Minnesota. If we did, I don't think I'd be a home inspector.
Right. Exactly. Same here. All right,
Oh,
next
man.
we got
Okay.
R value. Tessa, you take this one. What's R value?
R value, it measures how well something, I guess, insulates from heat, how resistive it is to heat transfer through material. So the higher the R value, the less conductive it is and the better insulation it's going to be. So
Perfect.
a couple things in a house that we look for as home inspectors for R value would be, well, the main one I'm thinking of is attic insulation, basically.
Yep.
And of course, you're going to have insulation in other areas of the house, the building envelope, like the walls, or if you've got a crawl space in the floor, whatever. Depends on your climate zone too. But especially, usually attics is kind of the only space that we can actually physically get into to evaluate, this thermal boundary and look at the type of insulation and how much there is. And the higher the R value, the better.
Yeah, and also with attics, it's probably about the only space where you would get a return on your investment for adding more insulation. You got poor insulation in your walls, too bad. You're never going to get a payback for tearing your walls open and insulating. Maybe if you've got absolutely zero insulation in your walls, maybe you could blow some in, but most of the time it's cost prohibitive to change it. The attic is the one place where you have easy access to it, and you usually have enough physical space to add more insulation. All right.
I will say, Reuben, there are some attics where you physically can't get into them, or it's like a story and a half where it's a slant ceiling where it's not accessible, and those attics you may not see a payback, or it may not be easy to add more insulation. So we're talking about the attics where you can like physically crawl into them and add more insulation. That's the easiest return on investment, because all these other spaces like you're talking about, a wall or slants, you can't really get in there easily. And most houses will have some sort of something in the exterior walls. So like you said, adding, a little bit of R value in a wall like that it's going to be a longer payback. But there are some old houses that have completely empty walls. And in that case, maybe it is worth the investment on blowing in insulation, dense packing those exterior walls, potentially, just depending on how long you plan on being in the house too. And,
That's right.
if comfort is an issue and other things going on. But I'd say that there's lots of variables to think about. We won't get into them on this show. But in general, add more insulation to your attic if it's accessible and you can.
Perfect. All right. Another one, efflorescence, not to be confused with effervescence. I've heard the wrong term used many times.
Oh, a very effervescent basement.
Yes.
I love hanging out in this space.
Bright and bubbly and very inviting, very effervescent.
So refreshing.
Yeah. No, efflorescence is these fuzzy salt crystals that get deposited usually on your foundation walls, sometimes on your basement floor, sometimes a lot of the time on garage floors we'll see it. It's these fuzzy little salt crystals that are left over when water has evaporated. And you can frequently have efflorescence on walls where the wall is dry. You don't have any water coming through, but you've got water drive. Water wants to come in. It makes its way through the wall, but it doesn't come through fast enough and in big enough quantities to actually have liquid water. All you get is the salt crystals, and the water evaporates before it actually drips. Is that a good explanation of it, Tess?
I like that. Yeah. Yeah. Think of your concrete wall as being a giant sponge in contact with water on the outside. And that moisture wants to dry to the inside, and it does dry. It just leaves behind little salt crystals.
And Tessa, I got to tease that topic. I got to tease it, okay? We're going to do another show on this probably. I recently heard about a basement waterproofing company who went out to one of our clients' houses and they used this $50 moisture meter from a big box retailer and they put it up against a concrete wall. And they said, look, it pegs the moisture meter. You need drain tile.
That's criminal.
It's criminal, and I want to do a show on this.
Maybe they're just very ignorant on how the moisture meter works. For anybody listening and doesn't understand what we're talking about, you cannot use a moisture meter directly on concrete. You can't use it on metal. You can, but it's always going to tell you that surface is wet. Correct?
Yes. Yeah. So, all right. That's another show. Just had to tease it. We'll talk about that.
Ooh, yeah.
Okay.
Man.
Flashing. Here's my definition of flashing.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well,
we're not talking about lifting up.
This is G-rated, Reuben.
Yeah. We're talking about the home version of flashing. It's stuff that gets installed to prevent water intrusion. How's that?
Yes, water intrusion. Yes.
We'll bring it right back to the beginning.
Yeah. You mean leaks? Yeah. Water intrusion. Perfect. Okay. So it's like a piece of metal that gets installed usually around windows or doors or at siding transitions from one material to another to make sure that water can't get in.
Yeah, or it could be holes in your roof. Like you'll have flashing for your roof vents, for your plumbing vents, for your bath fans. Those all come with their own flashing kits. And it doesn't have to be metal. It's not always metal. It's usually metal. And it's something that prevents water from coming in. Yeah, that's it. And
safe and appropriate flashing.
That's right. And it doesn't cost a lot of money. Doesn't cost a lot of money for the material, nor to install it. But when it's done wrong, it can cost a lot of money. It can cause a lot of damage. So, huge thing we look at during home inspections.
Yep. That's good.
So
that's good.
That was my list. Tess, you had a few others, I think. What else did you have on here?
Oh, yeah, we were just brainstorming a little bit, and one of the terms that came up was in-slab ductwork. What the heck does that mean?
Sure.
And I think we even as home inspectors, and when I was learning all these terms and terminology, I think there's something that trips us up a lot in this industry, and it's sub-slab ductwork versus transite ductwork. And there's a big difference, but a lot of times those terms get used interchangeably. In-slab ductwork is ductwork that's located in the slab, like in the concrete that's poured, below grade or on grade if you don't have a basement. And we do see that in Minnesota with in-slab ductwork in concrete. And then there's the transite in-slab ductwork, which a lot of times people just call it transite ductwork. And that's specifically referring to an asbestos material ductwork that's located in the slab, correct?
Yeah, exactly. Transite is a very specific term. A much more generic term would be in-slab, or you keep saying in-slab. I always say sub-slab.
Sub-slab
they're
ductwork.
Technically not the same thing, but I'll admit I use the two terms interchangeably.
Yeah. So sub-slab ductwork is ductwork located in the concrete. And that potentially could be a big issue in terms of if you've got moisture in your ductwork. A lot of times we see here in Minnesota standing water in ductwork that's located in the slab, either coming up from the ground below or poor water management. But as you can imagine, you don't want water standing in the material that your air is being distributed throughout your house with. That can lead to air quality problems and mold or microbial growth or dark staining that we see a lot. So, anytime we come across, sub-slab ductwork or transite ductwork with the asbestos, it could be potentially a big issue. And homeowners or buyers or clients don't even know what sub-slab ductwork is. So we have to make sure we explain that to them.
Yep, that's a good one. Yeah.
And I think we covered most of the other things that were on my list too that I wanted to add to that. I'm sure this list could go on and on, Reuben. We could probably have a part 2, and I'm sure our listeners have other terms they'd like to add to this list too. So where can people hit us up if they want to send us a note or tell us something we missed?
Yes, please email us. Our email is podcast at structuretech.com.
Podcast at structuretech.com. We love getting feedback from you guys. So please shoot us a note and we'll get back to you. And do we have anything else we want to add to this list before we...
No, I think that's it. We went way over. We were shooting for a 20-minute show. We're at like 50 minutes here. So much for that. All right. That'll conclude part 1. Maybe we'll come back with part 2 some other time. But
if anybody's still listening out there, sorry.
Yep. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Reuben Saltzman for Tessa Murry, signing off. Take care.